Welcome to a guided tour through our new special exhibition, Dream Machines, by the artists Janet Cardiff and George Bures Miller. It's one of the largest shows so far they did in their career, and it's kind of an overview with a lot of early works, but also running through the very last ones they created in the years of COVID. So welcome, Janet and George.
Thank you.
It's a cooperation with the Lehmbruck Museum in Duisburg. There the choice was maybe a little bit more restrained to the big and very important works. Here we wanted to add something, the very early works, and it's about the question of how you came together. Can you say something about that?
Well, it's interesting, we met at art school, and we started helping each other on each other's works immediately. Janet was actually in printmaking, so
once we started dating, we did.
Yeah, well, that's a given, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. We started helping each other. Then we decided we wanted to work on it together, and then since that, then we started collaborating because we couldn't remember whose idea it was. And collaboration is an interesting thing because when we had our solo works, there was always one boss, and I would be helping George, but it was his final decision. But with collaborating, then you have to agree. So I think it's created quite different works, that, but it's a combined of his talents and my talents, and foibles and interests and whatever, and putting it together. So it's kind of a weird mixture, I think.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful overlap as I experience it when I come into the exhibition first with the experiments in aerodynamics. Mm-hmm. That's a whole series where we show two works, two examples.
Yeah, that started, I guess, when was it? In the 90s sometime, so 94 I think is the first piece, and I was just playing with kind of kinetic sculpture, I think, in the Tinguely mode, being very influenced by Jean Tinguely, and but also interested in, I'd been working as a video editor and producer, and so I was always frustrated with specifically video art and how flat, and it was just kind of like, it's just there and it's just the image, and I wanted to move the video, and so I started working with these kinetic things, moving the televisions or having other elements move in the piece that hasn't shown for almost 20 years, called Imbalance Point 1, which we call Wings. It has this moving light bulb which kind of sets the whole room in motion. And so I was very interested in actually throwing the viewer off balance by having a television maybe moving in Jump. As in Jump, I did a few other works in that mode. And it kind of, having something that doesn't normally move basically throws the viewer off balance.
And I think with that also, I think the early works really show our interest in the magic of technology, how you can create illusions, that the viewer starts believing that the feet are pushing the TV, or there's this sort of back and forth in your brain that enjoys that kind of puzzle.
Like with the table to touch.
Yeah.
It's a magic table.
Yeah, it's sort of.
You fell in bed the week before.
I remember the feeling of dry blood mixed with tears in my eyes.
You know you're touching the table, and you know there's got to be technology in it, but at the same time you're sort of thinking that you're very aware that this table does have memories, it does have layers and things like that, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which is really nice to experience, yeah.
Yeah, but the magic too continues in some of the later works, in that we'd like to fool the audience in a fun way, because say with Muriel Lake, you're listening to the little film, and at the end part of the narrative is a bit of a detective narrative, but then all of a sudden the film breaks in the old style that films used to break. I don't know, you've probably been in films in the 80s and stuff like that, in the theater, where all of a sudden the film just goes psh, and starts burning up. So we did that with it, and people, even people I don't think they've seen that, they know enough that that means that, oh no, something's gone wrong. But then it's part of the narrative, so it's, and then the same with opera, that we have a
record skipping.
Yeah, the record skipping, and the illusion that the record's actually playing the sound, and then you realize at what point, oh, that's a trick, it's not playing the sound. So we like a lot of trickery.
I like a lot this kind of humor, that these little things that you really have to detect. You have to have a close eye to see them. One work I like very much too is the road trip, which is also links to your biography and has a lot of layers that I'm fascinated by how you brought these together.
Yeah, we think of it as almost a self-portrait in a certain way, even though Janet edited it to make me look worse, because we did edit it a bit, but it started out as just a conversation that we decided to record. So we just sat in front of our binaural head and went on each side of it and started recording this conversation about these slides. The slides were a carousel of images that my grandfather had shot during a road trip from Calgary, Alberta to New York City. And I'm trying to explain quite a bit of it to Janet, and we get in a little argument about the order of the slides. And so it kind of shows how we work together as well and how we converse as well.
Yeah, and it's totally off the cuff. Like, we didn't plan the conversation, we just edited it afterwards. And though it's a good example of how we work, we start on a piece, and that piece was supposed to be part of a huge installation that turned into maybe opera for a small room. But once we heard the audio that we'd edited and we saw it playing with some slides, then we realized we had a piece. So then that was, and I think that's so important to the way we work. We work in a very intuitive way, and we follow, it's like we have an English saying, you know, you follow your nose, that you're working away in the studio, but at the same time, if something happens here, you go, oh, that's really interesting. That's much more interesting than the original concept. So.
Right.
It's, that's definitely a product of that way of working.
There's a lot of triggering senses, and the nose is one, maybe in a little way, but it's much more about the audio, about the ears, about hearing, about the fascination for music and for sound in general.
I think what fascinates us about sound is that it bypasses the intellect. It can get right into your emotions. It gets right inside of you. The beat of a drum reverberates in your chest, and you feel the emotion of music, and you can't stop it. Like, we can close our eyes. The only way to get rid of sound is to really physically cover your ears, and it still gets through to you. You know, the subwoofers over there. Boo, boo, boo.
Yeah, the sound waves are invisible, but they constantly bombard us, and we're not really aware of it. Like, I think that's part of the power behind the 40-part motet use of the composition of Thomas Tallis' Spambanalium, is that we recorded each singer in very high quality sound, and we have 40 speakers. So and then having the choral combination and the voices moving around the room and the space just hits you, and you're left that you really have no defense to the beautiful composition as well as the intense sound.
And we will show this work as well, not in the exhibition here at the museum, but at the out of our museum at Ackermannshof, starting in June 30th and running all through July, August to mid-September. That's one of the most beautiful works also for people interested in music, having an experience with a choral piece that you cannot have in a way. Yeah,
Totally.
That's true, and also it really plays up our interest in sculptural sound, because you're very aware, sitting in the middle, of how the sound moves and how it actually forms the space. And you can walk around and sort of make your own composition with the singing. And the piece of music sort of unveils itself as you wander from one to another, or if you sit in the middle, it sort of combines. One of the things that was very important about the 40-part motet that we used afterwards in, say, the opera and some other pieces like Feedback and things like that, was that we started realizing that if you have a voice coming out of a speaker, it's very anthropomorphic. All of a sudden that speaker starts to become a person. Mm-hmm. So that was really kind of a real learning moment for us when we mounted that piece and realized that even though it's a technical stand and then a speaker, whatever, that becomes a virtual person.
It's good we're coming to this floor where we're sitting now. There are two major works. One is Opera for a Small Room, and the other one is The Instrument of Troubled Dreams, in the room we sit now, and there's even more composing your own music.
Yeah.
What's about this, the story behind?
Well, we like to give the viewers the freedom to do things. I mean, even in our linear narrative works, we always leave the narrative fairly open so that they can kind of, or they have to figure out what's going on. We're not giving them everything like a Hollywood movie does. But in this piece, we were really interested in allowing them to maybe compose their own film soundtrack. So we have different narrative keys. The red ones are Janet's vocals telling different stories. They're all kind of dystopic about, I mean, we did this piece in Amsterdam, and in Amsterdam the idea of...
in the Oude Kerk.
In the Oude Kerk. But in Amsterdam the idea of flooding and the world warming up and flooding is quite present. You're in the canals, you're around the canals, and the idea of that whole city being quite far below sea level already, and sea level rising. So there's a lot of dystopic stories and dreams that Jan was having at that time about
water sounds.
And yeah, so then we add the sounds of water. So there's music they can play.
Is that
So
that's the green keys?
Green keys are the music, black keys are sound effects, and the red keys are vocals. And so it's very, you can just build your own soundtrack, and so you can play a little bit of Janet. Some people don't play any of the vocal. Some people just make different things up. We hired a few composers to work on different pieces for the piece. So over on the left side is a piece by Tillman Ritter, and we recorded it so that different parts of the orchestra are separate, so you can add them by keys. So they're all separate parts, and they can all be played, so you can just have a little bit or a lot, push the whole thing.
This is a piece that in ways takes time to get to know it a little bit, because some sounds are really good as background sound. They sound very filmic, and then other sound effects are present. So you need to just listen to them, and then some sounds sound good with the voice on, and sometimes not, and things like that.
It's interesting, Jan and I play this piece completely differently.
Your works are very welcoming. They're kind of easy. You can go there and play and make your own experience. Some of them are interactive, but there's a lot of technique behind. As we've seen, it takes an hour to put on all the works. One of the most complex ones that we can show is your last one, Escape Room, that you did during COVID. It's a manifold piece with a lot of little things to discover. It's kind of endless. Yeah. Can you tell something about that, maybe for closing this tour?
Well, when COVID struck, we had a gallery show booked in New York 6 months later, and that was postponed for a year and a half, and then other shows were canceled and postponed. So we were basically stuck at home like everyone else, but we have studios, and we still had some of our workers that could come in. We worked with masks, so we basically just were able to just go into the studio, play around, make all these weird models, spend weeks on one model.
Weeks.
And then on the models you did in the computer and the laser cutting with the buildings, they're these huge apartment buildings that are huge, I mean like 8 feet high. And then you look in the windows and there's all the little furniture and everything like that. So we had the time given to us
because of COVID.
So we were able to just be stuck in the studio. And then the narrative started to be part of that, thinking about why people are making these sorts of things. And I started doing lots of research on figuring out how to do distress effects on dioramas, and realized there's a whole gaming community that makes games, physical games like Dungeons & Dragons or something. They'll make a physical model and then they'll play their little figures with it. It's this sort of make-believe thing that we really like. for the audience to get into and have and play. And that's why we called it escape room too, because that's a very common thing that people like to rent an escape room for birthday parties and stuff like that. Then they have to figure out clues and everything for them to get out of the room.
But for us, it was an escape room.
Yeah.
Like from COVID and from the whole thing, we built this room to get away from everything and tried to put as many worlds as possible into it. And and each of our worlds were different, and we worked on each other's together, but then, like, Janet's way less precise about model making. I was building these very specific scale buildings in the computer and then eventually outside of the computer, but she was like, oh, give me some mud and throw it together, and she built the mud castle, and I don't think there's any scale involved in that. There's big characters and little characters.
No.
So we're very different.
It's at the same time a wonderful manifesto for collaboration, this
Yeah.
whole word, because you extended it even more. Yeah. Well, thank you, Janet and George, for this beautiful exhibition and for all your dedication. We're really happy to have this fantastic show at Museum Tinguely in Basel.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you.